Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 15th, 2023 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. And we're going to start off this morning by interviewing candidates for the Urban Area Planning Commission. Karen, are they in the order that people are scheduled? Okay, so it looks like first we are going to have Dat Lum. Hello. Thank you for being here. So
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, is the light on at the base?
It's red.
Okay, I can hear
yeah.
you good. Okay. Welcome. I have some questions here to ask, and then afterwards, if the council has any follow-up questions, they will ask those as well.
Sure.
So please describe the role of the Planning Commission and that of a commissioner.
The role of the Planning Commission?
Yes.
And the commissioner itself?
Yeah.
Okay, so for a city to develop and for a city to grow, you need to have a function that looks forward, and it has the ability to take in the positives, the pros, the cons, meeting the city's vision. And so the Planning Commission would be tasked with that type of role, looking at all facets, from everything from economical to growth, not beyond economic growth, and incorporating that and providing that to the council.
Thank you. And what specific skills would you bring to the Planning Commission?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. So I spent 24 years in the Air Force, and I retired about 2 years ago. And during my time there, I was a civil engineer. So in layman's terms, the civil engineers in the Air Force did everything from city management to programming to design to construction to operations of a city. Well, I have spent 2 of my tours within the Air Force as a public works director, where I would work with folks like environmental protection, urban planning, the city management, working with the local beyond the base, where I would work with them to see how we would collaborate on how the base is used, whether we are encroaching on certain areas, especially when you have an airfield on an installation. Well, it's not just about property and land, right? It's about noise. It's about how the operations of a facility or of a base impacts the local city. So bringing all that allows me to kind of take a look at it from a city here as well, because that's what's in Air Force installations. It's a small city. My time at the Pentagon also allowed me to understand big picture, understand strategic thought process. So when you're putting together these plans, these strategic plans for the community, is that you have to have that foresight, that forward-looking mentality involved, not just what will happen this year, this month.
Thank you. What would you say is the most important skill for a planning commissioner to have?
Be inquisitive. You have to be inquisitive. You have to ask the questions that are underlying. You have to be able to understand the purpose, how it impacts the community, and to do that, you have to be willing to ask the questions. So I think that's the best quality that the person could have.
Should planning code always be followed?
Planning codes, they're rules and regulations. They're meant to be reviewed. They're meant to be looked at and evaluated over time, because things change. We evolve. And if you don't look at it and you don't ask the questions and you're just strictly going off of, like, this is the strict code, you might be missing something. You might not be evolving with the times. And so to answer that question is like, it depends. Like, are you asking all the right questions?
All right. I know you've already gone over this, but please describe your experience with land use and municipal planning and how your experience is relevant to the role of the Planning Commission.
Sure. So I'll give 2 examples. When I was down in New Mexico as the almost like the deputy public works there, we were expanding the installation, building out about $3 billion worth of airfield facilities, infrastructure, on the installation, and also growing the installation. And so I was able to work with the local community there quite a bit to work out utility usage, land usage, compatibility, environmental protection issues. And I did the same thing up in Washington, where I was actually the public works director up there for Joint Base Lewis McChord up in Tacoma. And at the time, there was two installations. There was an Air Force installation as well as a Army installation. Those two installations under the federal requirement combine as one, so joint base. And they were separated by about 3 miles, and we had to figure out how we combined those two. The main highway, Highway 5, that ran through there, we had to figure out how to make that part utilized better, because it was going to cause congestion based on how we were setting things up. So those two examples are where I kind of had the most impact when it comes to doing urban planning, looking at growth of an installation of a city, and I think that would help me bring a lot of value to this commission.
Describe how you would use the city's code and other information to balance the rights of a property owner versus those of a neighbor or groups of people if you find they're in conflict on an application.
The code is your guiding light, right? And so if you take the code and then there's 3 sides to every story, right? And so using the code as your guiding light is that figuring out what the right decision needs to be for everyone involved. I think that's a guiding light. It's not the end all be all, but you have to use that somewhere so that you can measure your decision.
And my final question is, did I come close to saying your name correctly?
It's dot lamb, and it's like .com. So
Okay.
just pronounce that way.
Lamb?
Yeah, .lamb is the last name, yep.
Okay. Councilors, do you have any other questions for Dot? Go ahead, Joel.
I just don't have any questions. I just want to really honestly thank you for your service and
you.
your dedication to your profession. It's very evident, and with all due respect, thank you.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I love what I do. And leaving the military, you kind of miss that service part of it. And I think it's time. It's time for me to get back and help.
Valerie?
Which brings me to the question, how long have you been in the Oregon in Grants Pass area?
2 years. We moved here in January 2021. We actually, my wife and I, just a little story, my wife and I had looked for a home. We had moved back to Oregon all the way from Portland all the way down to Ashland. Okay. And when we visited Grants Pass, we were just
in love.
We were in love. So we stopped within the first month of looking. We stopped looking anywhere else, just Grants Pass. We spent 6 months looking for a home in Grants Pass.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. I have
Thank
one
you.
more question is, how familiar are you with the laws of Oregon and land use laws? Because I know Oregon has land use laws that are a little different than other states. So how familiar are you with the Department of Land and Conservation and some of the laws coming down through the state?
Yeah, great question, and I can be completely honest with you. I need to learn. I need to learn more, and I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put in the time. I don't see it any different than when I moved from state to state every 2 years, learning their rules, learning their policies. When I was at the Pentagon, learning the federal policies and requirements. So I don't think I'll have a difficult time learning it at all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see any other questions, so thank you for applying and your time here today. And I think, are we making a decision on this Wednesday night this week? Wednesday night, we'll make the appointments and let you know either way.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
All right, our next applicant is going to be Lori Arthur. And I think Karen's probably gone to find her. Hello, good morning.
It's on, I think.
Is it still morning for a minute? Thank you for being here today. We are interviewing applicants for our Urban Area Planning Commission, and you have been on the commission for a while. Can you tell us how long you've been serving there?
I don't know, maybe 20 years.
Oh, okay. Can you please describe the role of the Planning Commission and that of a commissioner?
Well, the Planning Commission's role is primarily to enforce the rules and regulations of the Oregon land use laws and of the city codes, and to compare the applications that come in and make sure that they do meet all the requirements. That's the primary task. Don't get to do much of the fun part of actual planning. And then we also work with code revisions and updating, trying to keep up with the world in that area.
What specific skills do you bring to the Planning Commission, and what is the most important skill for a commissioner to have?
Well, what was the first part?
What specific skills would you bring to the
okay.
Planning Commission?
Well, besides a lot of recent years, I had served on a planning commission in Michigan before I retired and came back to Grants Pass. And I had also gone to architecture school at University of Minnesota up to senior level before we moved from Minnesota to Michigan, and was interested in the urban planning area of that. And I've tried to keep up over the years with everything that's going on. The experience I had in Michigan was rather surprising because it was in a community who had just finished their plan for semi-rural development as a far-out suburb of Detroit. And they said, you know, you come and you meet on one Tuesday night for study session, and the other Tuesday night for conducting the business, kind of like your workshops and that. And one Saturday morning for site reviews. So, you know, it's an easy job and it's interesting and all that. Well, 3 weeks into my service there, General Motors walked in with a proposal for the largest industrial assembly plant in the world in that township. And so it suddenly became many evenings a month and lots of activity and lots of very, very technical learning involved in the land use process and in seeing how a major company deals with executing its plans. So it turned out to be a pretty exciting several years, and they did actually come in and do their first, what they call just-in-time, where they have, instead of storing all the parts there, they have everything delivered just in time for the assembly line process. But the whole thing was a real learning process and was very interesting. And that's basically why, when I moved here, I decided that was the one community activity I did want to continue to participate in. Because I could see what it contributed to that community to bring in jobs and income to the community, and people who drove by on the I-75 had no idea that that whole facility was even there, miles square, because they did such a good job of concealing it and keeping it from, you know, imposing on the community. So,
Thank you. Should planning code always be followed?
Yes. I think, looking ahead, if we want to get quick results on more housing here particularly, we're going to have to really encourage infill, because for infill, you have your streets and water and sewer and electricity utilities already out front there, and it's more a matter of making sure you have capacity and connecting without having to do all the huge infrastructure building. But what we found, and particularly recently, we just had a case you guys did, I don't know, a couple weeks ago at the end of our street where you narrowed a street, Bellevue, to allow for somebody to enlarge and rehab an abandoned house there. Variances are pretty clearly defined, but in the parts of this town that were built 100 years ago or 50 years ago, we have pretty clear evidence that, like in our neighborhood, they laid out the plat map without reference to geography. And so you have First Street running back and forth through the middle of Gilbert Creek. Well, of course, it was never built. But we find that when people come in, as they did for that house, not only was there a misunderstanding about the width of the street in front, and they found out when they had the survey done that the house was set crooked on the lot and was 6 inches over at the rear end into the setback area. And these kinds of things happen all the time. Apparently, the early survey and building methods weren't too precise. And so those people, like when I bought my house, it was built in 1948, and it came with whatever it came with. I didn't choose to change boundaries or anything. So if we're going to be dealing with infill and encouraging people to do that, we will have to be pretty friendly towards the variances that are needed to accomplish it, as long as it's not destroying the neighborhood and bothering the neighbors and that kind of thing. But otherwise, yes, code does need to be followed and enforced.
I know you've already touched on this, but please describe your experience with land use and municipal planning, and/or how your experience is relevant to the role of the Planning Commission.
Well, I think the most valuable part of my experience here was working the 6 years it took to get the urban growth boundary expansion accomplished, because we had to go into every aspect of the state, 19 required premises, and see how we would help our community grow in that area. After I graduated from high school here, I went to San Jose State, and then I lived in San Jose, Chicago, Minneapolis, Detroit for 30 years, and Boston. And I had more than enough opportunity to see what happens where the communities didn't plan and the growth was not controlled and everything just went berserk. The high school district I taught in San Jose at that time was adding a full high school every year for 9 years straight. The rate of growth was just crazy. And so I really appreciated when I moved here learning about Oregon's land use, and although a lot of people think it's very restrictive, it's also one of the reasons it's made it a highly desirable place for people to come to. And it is possible to accomplish both goals of being able to build for your community and do it without destroying the good parts. The one fact that I like to cite is that at the close of the 20-year urban growth boundary expansion, it expands Grants Pass's boundaries, I think, to 11 or 11.4 acres. And the 50-year one was, no, I'm sorry, from 11 acres, from 11 square miles to 13 square miles. And the 50-year one goes from 13 square miles to still 15-something, under 16. And Josephine County has 1,640 square miles of land. So even after our 50-year expansion, we'll still be less than 1% of the county, which is containing growth pretty well. And a lot of hysterical letters to the editor get written about how everything's growing too fast and, you know, we shouldn't be expanding. But 1% of the county is not excessive expanding. So, okay, that's enough.
Describe how you would use the city's codes and other information to balance the rights of a property owner versus those of a neighbor or groups of people if you find they are in conflict on an application.
Well, we basically do that with every variance request and every proposal that comes in that has people coming and commenting on it. Normally, the code does a good job of keeping things livable and not allowing one land use or one location to impose upon another one. And I think we generally require that to be followed. And sometimes the land neighbors and so on will get together and talk it out and find ways to resolve whatever the conflicts are or the concerns. In many cases, it's a concern that turns out to not really be a conflict, or not happen, something that's not going to happen. I don't know if that's
Works for me. Council, do you have any other questions? DJ?
Sure. So I've been impressed for some time about your philosophy of land use, why land's being utilized the way it is, and the history about that. I've read those documents you provided to us. And I find that really impressive. Well, inside there, you know, you've written letters to DLCD about these philosophies and changes, because I think you understand very well that land inventory is really important for development, and it's an issue in these areas. Has that matured into a dialogue with DLCD? Have you had active communication with them and, you know, I guess gaining ground in some way or other?
not active communication, but a lot of the things that I asked to be considered for model code back in 2008 appeared in the Bill 2000, including the ones that are upsetting people about being able to put duplexes and triplexes and so on single-family lots and the ADUs. It doesn't totally address my long-term concern about housing for single people who are more than half of the population now, half of the adult population, because we haven't had any examples locally for people to see of how you could do that for home sharing or single-room occupancy, adult dormitories that have some amenities. The whole premise of all of the buildings since World War II has been to follow the model that Levittown set out, where everybody, in order to convert the economy back to, especially Detroit, to convert all those factories from making tanks and armaments back to making stoves and refrigerators and cars. We had to have everybody have a single-family home that they had to buy all those things for and have a car to get to. And that whole economy set up the idea that that's the only way of living. And dealing with realtors, especially when they're our planning commission chairman, for years we used to argue that. that the only thing you can sell, you should build and sell, is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath suburban ranch that really now only fits about 20% of the population of the families. The concept of even that model code was referencing the typical family of 4, which isn't the typical household nowadays, and really never was. It's a figment from a point in time in 1947 to 50 when everybody came back from the war and wanted to get houses and start families and so on. I think a lot of progress has been made, but we still are lacking any good examples of alternatives that people can actually see, and they can't ask for anything they have never heard of or can't imagine happening. In the old days, in the larger cities, and I've seen this, we had a girl that came with a house. We used to rent Harvard housing in Boston in the summers when my husband worked in Boston in the summers. And one time they would rent us the house if we would take the girl that came with it, who was a handicapped girl who had a job as a photo passer. She was in her early 20s, and her job was to look at the pictures as they came out of the photo processor and make sure they're okay and package them and that kind of thing. And when the person that we rented from graduated from law school and moved on, she went to live in Boston in a residence for women. And that kind of thing was common in the old days. Nice, safe, large buildings with residences, and usually with dining halls and, you know, your own room. And the idea of the families with farmhouses had hired hands and uncles and extended family. That's always been the case. It just hasn't been the featured model in the American Dream little posters and so on. But anyway, I don't know how to push it any farther, any faster. We have a few opportunities around here right now to do something like that.
Any other questions? All right. All right, well, thank you for applying, for serving 20 years, and for being here with us today. We will be making a decision on this appointment Wednesday night and get back to you one way or the other.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all and all the previous counselors, because I think the council here has done a great job of planning for the future, starting with the strategic planning, and really paying attention to keeping the infrastructure up to capacity and fixing the potholes and, you know, maintaining what we have and not just avoiding paying for everything. And they've been doing a good job on that. And they've also done a good job on avoiding costly lawsuits and so on, getting into land use issues unnecessarily. I think we've only had one remand in the last 10 years. I can't even remember. Is that right? Yeah. And that was when you guys voted against our recommendation. I think overall, the council has been compatible with the goals of the land use, even though they don't like some of the maybe specific regulations. But it's really important to do that. I do have one item I'd like to mention, and that is the Fourth Bridge discussion that was going on recently. I'll pick on Joel on this. We're not supposed to pick on individual counselors. We talked to him.
I'm honored for that.
Okay. I talked to him about this several years ago, at the time when they were really considering the Allen Creek expansion.
Lori, the city
Huh?
attorney, the city attorney is saying that we need to not talk about this. So,
Oh, about Fourth Bridge? Oh,
This isn't public comment, it's a UAPC interview. So it's a discussion about an experience, which he's going to bring to UAPC. But I think conversation about any other topics not noticed is not appropriate.
okay. Well,
okay.
if you would like to
Well, my general
send us
advice is to look at the big picture, not the little narrow slice of it that's involved in any of the things that you're working on. Look at the whole picture. So,
Thank
Yeah.
you. All right. No more questions, so thank you for
Okay,
being here
thank
today,
you.
and you can always send us an email or come back on Wednesday for public comment if you'd like. Thank you. All right, so we will have that discussion Wednesday. We have 2 applicants, 1 position. Next up, sale of city-owned property discussion. Looks like Brad is coming up to take over on that one.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. We've got Brad on here. We have Jason Kennedy on here, but we also have Mark Trinidad, who was actually our lead research on this, and then we also have Josh Hopkins, who several of these properties are parks related. So just want to make sure you have that. And then Amber, of course, our housing and neighborhood specialist, was also involved in some of these recommendations. Before I started, I thought I'd just throw out one thought, Mayor. I could pretty easily put the council to sleep by going through all of this material. What we did, hopefully you received it, there's a supplement there that has all the detail on these properties. Adds up to about 65 acres of surplus land. So we kind of just boiled it down to, in the PowerPoint, to just, showing you the parcels and then more or less the recommendation from staff. If you're okay with that, and then we could just kind of field questions related to infrastructure. Jason here, as I mentioned, the rest of our team is here. So I thought that's where it could at least start, unless you really wanted us to go into a lot of detail during the presentation on each parcel.
I don't know that we had an expectation of each parcel, so we'll take the highlights and then people can ask questions is fine.
Okay. So the subject, reviewing our city-owned parcel, surplus land, barriers and opportunities for development. Councilor DeLaGrange had originally done some research and identified several of these. You've already discussed it once. City Manager Kubik kind of did a highlight that was last couple months ago, and then a result of that, you wanted us to go ahead and do some more deep dive research. So that's what we did, and relates to your council goals to facilitate sustainable and manageable growth. It was February 27th that Aaron presented the list of properties. Proceeds of the sale could be used to leverage new housing production, incentivize affordable housing, increase the city's affordable housing fund. That, as you know, has been traditionally how the proceeds of the surplus property have been used to date. So we took a look at these 23 parcels and their proximity to the infrastructure, looking at a number of different factors, and that's what's in the one of the supplements that's in front of you there. So kind of moving through from top to bottom in no particular order here. So the Starlight Sunset properties, 19.6 acres. There is on the screen behind me, the yellow one is the tax lot, and then the larger image is the one that Councilor DeLaGrange kind of put together as a rough concept for maybe how some multiple lots could be created there. This property is identified as a special use area in our master parks plan. It would require amendments to the master plan if you were to take it completely out. It's pretty steep. The area that's shown in green, those lots, that is more or less below that 15% slope, so there is some viability there. The city does own the lot that connects to Sunset there, so there is direct access. There is no requirement to access from Starlight. Beacon Hill, council's pretty familiar with this, 9 acres. Councilor DeLagrange had suggested the 3 lots that are blue, one on each side of the existing house on Hillcrest, and then another one on Beacon. So these would be potentially viable. Our thought from staff, there is sewer and water in Beacon. A lot of infrastructure still needed on Hillcrest. There would be a lot of probably potential benefits to maintaining some kind of access for the cities if that became a park, you know, from Beacon rather than only providing Hillcrest. We think there's some advantages to having access down there, closer to where the development is. There's a number of public works comments on this particular one that Jason inserted, and so that's in your comment there if you had any questions or wanted to talk about any of those. Hamilton Lane, there's 2 parcels here. The northern one got the blue X on it, and the yellow one, the northern one's 2.5 acres, the other one's 3.5. We've had these for a number of years. It is reasonably flat out there, so there certainly is development potential. This is another one that's identified in our Parks and Rec master plan as being a future park, neighborhood park. There is, if you look at the overall area in the southeast, there is pretty limited open space, public open space today. I think that was probably one of the reasons that it was purchased to begin with, because it does offer that public open space. The next nearest one is Fruitdale Park. It's about a little over a mile away. And as we'll talk about in the next agenda item, this is located in one of the larger areas acreage-wise in our urban growth boundary that needs to be potentially rezoned. There was a consideration given by the council several years ago to potentially selling this off, and some of you may have been involved with that. There was quite a bit of opposition from the neighborhood when it was last discussed. But all that being said, in terms of physical limitations, there is sewer that runs in the overland pedestrian pathway that runs right through here. That's pretty accessible, a little bit more challenging for water. Skycrest Drive, these are 2 parcels, the 2 out of the 23 that are actually outside the urban growth boundary. They're both about 1.3 acres. Don't ask about the real market value of $870. We don't have any real good information on that. We, from a staff standpoint, didn't see any real foreseeable value or function for the city at this time, and those could be sold, put on the market. 723 Northwest 5th. This is the small residential lot just right up the street, 0.2 acres. This is part of that overall vision for this block that Aaron has spoken about several times in terms of consolidation of parcels to create some opportunity for expansion of the campus for here at City Hall or maybe some other public facilities. That's currently being rented out today. Redwood and West Park, 2 parcels here close to each other. From what we can tell, these are remnants from when the public right-of-way was created and built through there, just sort of, these leftover parcels. The 1503 is the one that fronts on 6th Street. The one on the far right there. That is close proximity to ODOT, city public rights of way. There could be some challenges with getting, turning movement in there. They're pretty small, not to say it couldn't happen though. So there may be some opportunity there for either one of these to, to have some other landscaping features. The last sentence there, we could, you could put it on the market, sort of test the market viability, see if anybody bites, and have some ideas for either one of those. But pretty unique, particularly if the goal of your conversation today is to increase the inventory for housing. Those could be challenging on that front. Southeast 8th Street. This is a very small parcel, 0.1 acres. It is zoned R4 though, so it's got a little bit more opportunity for height on some future structure. The city has brought this to the council before. We have had a couple of folks in the community that have expressed some interest in it. The narrow frontage of the site could be difficult, but there's existing properties on either side that if the property was merged or combined, that might provide a little bit easier opportunity to develop it. But either way, there is some opportunity there and could be put on the market. High Glen Loop. This is part of our Dollar Mountain complex. Two different parcels up here. The dot there, that round is one of our reservoirs, water reservoirs. So there's, in terms of the visioning that has been happening with the Dollar Mountain group, this would have some of the mountain bike path through it. There's also, because of the water reservoir, some public works related issues. For these, at this point, staff would recommend retaining the property for those reasons just stated. Allen Creek, there's a number of properties here. You've heard from Public Works about the expansion of Allen Creek and the project that's ongoing. A couple of these are very much linked into that Public Works project. Specifically, the one up on the north end is the site of one of our stormwater ponds. So we would obviously need to hold on to that. That engineering is underway. The others we do have in our parks plan. Like several of these, there's five of these 23 are identified in the master parks plan, including a couple of these. But it is certainly ripe for development. Sewer, water, the infrastructure in Allen Creek is there, and especially with the projects starting here in next year, there'll be a good opportunity to connect out there to New Hope. And then 720 Northwest 6. This is the last one on the list. This is the on-track offices. Pending property transfer to the city through the agreement that we have drafted. If not intended for future city use, the property has multiple options. The general commercial zoning district on this is pretty broad in scope in terms of what can be done in that particular zone. So council, call to action at your discretion. So there are a lot of cost implications that we didn't go into a lot of detail here. We can kind of work through that today. The alternatives provide specific property direction on one or all of these, move to additional workshops, take no action.
Thanks, Brad. We do have Brian online, just so everyone knows. Does anybody have any questions about these? Joel?
So I'm a little bit ignorant on market conditions, and there's people here on the council that aren't. So when we sell something, what's coming up, my understanding is interest rates are going to come down a little bit in the near future and then probably go back up again and maybe go fairly high, which then would reflect on the market value of these properties. But it seems to me like that needs to be part of the discussion for any properties that we decide to sell.
Do you have questions for Brad?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't expect Brad to answer it, but what does the future hold in terms of market availability, in terms of that? And he doesn't know that. The other thing I have, and it's more a comment than a question, is, so a lot of these were purchased with either park funds or general fund, and they're one-time shot. And so then, when you sell them, what do you use the money for? And I think that my understanding that it would need to be up for discussion as well.
Yes, and I kind of failed to mention that JC did the research on staff in terms of how they were acquired, and in your profile document, there is a question near the end there that notes whether it was purchased with SDC funds. You'll see a lot of those are unknown, but several of these were purchased with either 100%, like the Hamilton ones, or a portion that were secured with Parks SDC money. So that's identified in there. So yeah, that would, if it's an unknown, we would probably need to do a little bit more verification just to make sure. But we didn't have Parks SDCs. I think JC identified it. It came into the 90s, at some point in the 90s. So if they were acquired prior to the 90s. We can be pretty certain that you don't have to be concerned with how the Parks SDCs were, or how they play into it.
Valerie?
Yeah, I have a couple questions on the Hillcrest property, because I know that right now they are doing the bridge, seismic bridge. I know that they just completed, the county completed 10th, and we've completed at least part of Beacon was done. So my question is on those two pieces right there. It kind of says that water, there is water on Hillcrest, am I correct? Partial 6-inch main in northeast portion of frontage along Hillcrest Drive. It requires a 760-foot main extension to bring water across the entirement of the subject's parcel frontage. So I guess I want clarification on that. Is that just along the Hillcrest that you're going to need more water extension?
So our development code, if either a private property owner develops or the city develops, requires that at that time, if the utilities aren't there, it's going to have to go across the whole frontage.
Okay, which is along the Hillcrest frontage,
Yep,
correct?
yep.
So that would be along the Hillcrest. And then, and my next question was, as I know that they're getting ready to do a multimodal, but that does not include doing anything with water, am I correct? But
It
yeah.
does. That project will include water and pavement in the next, I'm going to say 2 years and be generous, but I think we're going to be in there before that.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is to me, if you are indeed going to do that, it would make sense to wait until we ran the water up that part and did that, and then do this, correct? I mean, I'm just kind of thinking logically.
If I was a property owner and I owned that property, I would wait until the city makes those infrastructure improvements before trying to subdivide and sell.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, Brad, you mentioned on the 720 Northwest 6th Street property, you said, if not intended for future city use, and then we've got, the Northwest 5th Street property says intended to be an expansion of City Hall campus, public facilities. So is there some kind of, in writing somewhere, a plan about expanding City Hall campus, what the total acreage is sought, and when we would be reaching that? Or is there any kind of plan, any budget, anything in writing? Or is it just kind of in somebody's mind somewhere?
Not to my knowledge. I'll defer to Aaron to see if he wants to provide some feedback on that.
Not a target acreage or study that's been done on what a replacement city hall would require.
Other questions? Joel?
So I was just dealing with process, Mayor, and you've probably already figured this out, but, so we have a decision-making process on these properties. What is it?
A decision-making process? I guess council would need to propose that we do something with one of the properties would be the first step, and they're just in a holding pattern for the time being.
So what I heard you say was one of us needs to venture forth a hypothesis of which properties we want to sell and then move that on for discussion.
I suppose are we done with questions? All right, we can move on to discussion if you have something you'd like to propose, Joel. No? Oh, Brian. We can't hear you.
Can you get? Oh no, how about now?
Okay, that's much better.
Okay. Well,
Oh, no, you're cutting out, Brian.
all this property. All right.
I got less than half the words there.
I'll pass.
He passed. Okay, if you are able to type it out, I'll read it for you. Valerie?
Well, honestly, the only one that I really, at this point, and that's because there was people asking about that narrow frontage. If I remember correctly, that one was one of the ones we went through before, and there were some people nearby that looked like they might be interested. I mean, I can see selling that. The other ones, for the most part, I know, like I said, Beacon, I would like to see those houses built, but I think it's a matter of timing. We've been waiting for that timing up there with all the roads and things that are happening. So that's the one now I can see, or also the top of Starlight, the ones that aren't really necessary. But those are the only ones right now I feel comfortable, and I think would not take a lot of thought for, because they're pretty well staff recommended selling too.
I heard Starlight and Beacon, I missed the other one.
Well, there was two up on Starlight. Southeast 8.
Eight. Okay.
Eighth, you're right. Southeast 8th was one that I mentioned, and then the Skycrest Drive.
Okay. I saw Dwayne and maybe Rob had hands? Or was it Rick? Dwayne and Rick, okay. Yes, go ahead, Dwayne.
I would be in support of selling the Starlight property. The Redwood West, I'd like to see if there's anybody that'd want those properties. I think we could put them out there to see if there's any 8th Street, say it right, 8th. And I think that's it on my list of things that I would be okay with. Maybe Skycrest.
Rick, then Joel?
I would be in favor of Exhibit 4, Starlight, for sale. Exhibit 7, Skycrest, 2 properties. And I hope we could get a updated value on the 1.3 acres. I realize the fact is it's probably been owned by the city, has never been really updated to a current value. And then number 10, page 10, Southeast 8th Street. Thank you.
Joel?
Well, I would add to the discussion the existing bicycle paths up there, that when we partition it off, if we can see some kind of multiple use to where we can have either right-of-way or easement or whatever for some of the existing bicycle paths along with the selling of the property.
Which property?
The other thing I would add is
I don't know.
the building on 6th Street.
You lost them, they don't know what property you're talking about with the bicycle lanes.
I believe it's the Starlight property that has the existing mountain bike trails through. They're kind of rogue trails. And then the other one that I would add to the discussion would be the property on 6th Street, the Yankee Pot Roast.
Okay, Brian, you want to try again?
Sure, how's this?
Much better.
Okay, good. So when I put that list of properties together, you know, I essentially, they made the list because they're all more or less could be considered dead weight as far as the city's concerned. There's arguments that could be made for a couple of them, maybe particularly close to City Hall there, but breaking off the bottom half or bottom third of that Starlight property makes a lot of sense. Breaking off a couple of properties at Beacon Hill makes a lot of sense. Breaking off part of the Parks Reserve land out on, I believe it's Hamilton, I don't have it in front of me, makes a lot of sense because they would still retain about half of that open space. Really, I think all of them are worth considering getting rid of, considering our budget situation and the fact that we don't have any plans to do anything with most of them. You know, obviously retain the Highland Loop properties. I didn't put those on there. But all the other ones, you know, we need resources and these are just sitting here. Even the Park Street properties, we should sell those, and obviously those wouldn't be housing, but those would be revenue for the city, and if someone
Oops.
Oh,
to them. So I'm in favor of trying to offload most of these.
Okay. DJ?
Sure, let me just run down the list. Starlight Sunset, that makes sense. Turn it into houses. Those will not be affordable houses. That is a very steep and challenging area to build on. It won't pencil, but we can't really do that up here, but it makes sense to turn that one into housing. Beacon Hill, I see merit to the idea of having a couple parcels there, sort of infilling in that northeastern corner, save for the one coming off Beacon. I definitely agree with
Staff.
secondary egress for the park intentions on that. Hamilton, both blue and yellow is yes, but we're talking about infrastructure considerations that we are not going to make here, but that is also makes great sense to turn into houses. Skycrest Drive, those are pig dog lots, nobody wants them. Corner Redwood and West Park, yeah, you could fit some units there if you really wanted to. It's zoned GC. You would have to rezone that, go through that effort, because you cannot build residential on GC anymore. This council decided that a couple years ago. Highland Loop is just another pig dog situation. 8th Street, that's just get rid of it. There's parcels there. It's not useful to really anybody but the adjacent owners, and if they've showed interest, liquidate that piece of property. Allen Creek is just a bear. It's just a bear. We need to focus our attention and really think about what we're going to do out there.
Vanessa?
I'm also in support of the Starlight, Beacon Hill, Hamilton, Blue and Yellow, Skycrest, Redwood West Park, and 8th Street.
Valerie?
Excuse me, I have a question on the Starlight Sunset, because we did get something from the parks about that there is a Mountain Hill Park there currently. Is that on the Starlight, if I'm not mistaken, Sunset Properties? A section of that is currently part of a mountain bike area, and I'm just curious as to whether we cut off part of it, whether that would be affected by.
So looking at the map, the part at the lower part is more where an old irrigation ditch runs. There is a pathway through there that many people use for mountain biking and hiking in that general location. It's not an official, like, city-sponsored developed mountain biking park.
Right.
It's one that the community has just been using for decades, since like the 40s, for mountain biking purposes.
Okay, well, I just have curious. So in looking at this, you're saying that there is a kind of it's not designated, so it's obviously, it wasn't purchased with money. It's just a piece of property, and that is an area that's being used. And is it right along You said the irrigation ditch that they use it? I don't.
So for the mountain bike hill parcel, that's what it's called in Parks Master Plan. It's long since been used as a mountain biking location. They drop in off of Starlight, come down and through. There's a bunch of weird stuff built out there that the community has built over the years, rollers, ramps, things like that, that are kind of an issue. And I mean, it's a weird parcel. There's a bunch of different tree houses out there and everything. People have just been using it as like their backyard for many years. This parcels that have been parceled off and sectioned, what you guys are looking at is more on the lighter in the steepness of the slope side. Along that area, it's the irrigation ditch that people are kind of following along the channel there as far as how they're accessing it. And then one of the other issues, we have had complaints recently and in the past about this parcel is people access it with their dirt bikes and then run up through Dollar Mountain and things like that and then onto the private property. But it was never really developed as a mountain biking thing from the city like Dollar Mountain's planning to be. It's just been a location that people have been using it for that purpose for years. The city acquired it in like 1947 or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, just to add a little more context to that, I spoke with Chad, the chair of the Parks Committee, about this parcel specifically because he and a couple other people had concerns about the mountain biking aspect going away. He was under the impression that we were considering selling off the entire parcel. So after I kind of gave him more details about what we were thinking, about just using like the lower third, the flatter area, and retaining the rest, and hopefully, you know, still being able to provide access to the remainder through that bottom portion as well. He was a lot more comfortable with that idea once he heard the details. And then he also has been talking with Parks Committee a little bit about starting to maybe develop that area a little bit more like they did with the B Street jumps last year. So that's something that is probably going to be on their radar soon as well.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, I have no disagreement with any of the properties or portions of properties that were mentioned by other councilors, and I would support liquidating all of them. In addition, the 720 Northwest 6th Street property, unless there is a compelling reason that that property is some part of some pretty specific plan, I would also advocate liquidating that one. It's one of the more valuable ones, money-wise. It does have a historic building on it, which I'm not sure what the city would ultimately do with that building. And unless there's a compelling reason to keep it, I'd put that on the list as well.
DJ?
I realized I totally skipped over that one when I went down the list. I am also in agreement of that. That was a windfall for us, and we need to do something good with it.
All right, we don't actually have that one yet, but it looks like at least several councilors are supportive of the idea of selling that. Valerie?
I think that to me, it's important that we keep, obviously, a part of Beacon for Beacon Hill Park that needs to be there. But I also think when we look at the two on Hamilton, I think, you know, I don't think we can get rid of both. I think we need to make sure that we keep parkland in there, no different than the Allen Creek. Those were, you know, it's important that we keep park and green space available for the homes that are around it. So I think when we look at the Hamilton, blue or yellow, we need to decide what part of it we want to keep. What is the part that makes most sense to keep as a park, and what is the most developable for that? So, and that's the same with Allen Creek. Those are some big time conversations we need to have before we just write them off. But the rest of them, I think you could get started on. But those two are the ones I think we need to have a little bigger conversation as to which part of it we want to retain for parkland and which we want to have housing on.
All right, it sounds like there's a lot of interest in developing a plan to release part of these properties. I guess each one has a little bit of a unique situation, so it's a, you know, a little bit tricky here. I think we'll have to have staff develop a recommendation for each of the properties, and some of them it may be selling off a portion of them and developing others, or holding on to others as parkland or reserve of some sort. But do you need anything specific from us today? It sounds like all the properties are on the table in one way or another, except perhaps Highland Loop and Allen Creek need a better, more of a long-term, I guess, especially in Allen Creek is a pretty significant chunk of property out there, so.
Yeah, I think what we can do is we have this list of potential liquidation, sale, or something along those lines. Some of them may need further discussion before we move forward, like Allen Creek Road and et cetera. But what we have right now is it seems like relatively general consensus of Starlight, Skycrest, Southeast 8th, as some of those that everyone basically said yes to, and we can start taking a look at doing those first and just work our way down the line as we have the ability to do so, but start with like the ones that I mentioned first, and it will require some work on our part to determine, say for instance, a Starlight, Skycrest, what exactly are we looking at, how are we going to partition those out, that kind of thing. And as we move forward with those, we'll bring them to council for further decision making.
Sounds like a good plan to me. Does anyone else have any concerns, comments? Nope. All right. Thank you. Thanks for putting this all together. All right. Next up, transportation impact analysis.
All right. So there's a little bit of crossover here between your last topic and this one. I did go through, we inserted a little bit more detail on a couple of these areas that you'll see that are in the packet in front of you that weren't in the packet on Friday, just to kind of help give a little bit more opportunity for conversation. But the subject in summary, really assessing the viability and the prioritization of a second city-initiated rezone and traffic impact analysis is what we understand it to be. There's been, as you know, a long process. Some would say, unfortunately long for Allen Creek, due to a number of learning curves. That it was kind of the first one that the city did. We didn't have any good models around the state. It's a pretty unusual process for a city to initiate rezones of these scales. So, but we have been fortunately learning some lessons throughout the process. So those are the two council goals that this topic relates to there: facilitating sustainable manageable growth and provide cooperative shared leadership. 2014, we expanded the UGB. Land that was added to the UGB, there's a mixture out there of both urban and rural zoning. 2020, community development, we filed an application to rezone all of it, all 540 plus acres, all in one swath, rather than breaking it up into groups. And it was into that process where we received the letter from Oregon Department of Transportation, who kind of raised the issue that I think you're all familiar with related to the state statute. Here is the map that was submitted in the application in 2020. That identifies the 5 sub-areas that were in the overall urban growth boundary that need to be rezoned to a city zone. Initially, there was actually another 60 plus acres right at the north, direct north side of I-5 That's along Scenic Drive and Granite Hill. There's all of that land is designated employment in the comprehensive plan. There actually today, you couldn't go in and do new residential in any of that 60+ acres. There's another set of complicating factors which we weren't going to go into today because the city council at that point said, yeah, let's take that area out. But I did want to point out that that is another area that's pretty significant in size that is in the urban growth boundary that is not being considered, at least up until this point. And again, that would really require a lot of community outreach to those folks up there. But otherwise, these are the set of 5 areas: North A, North B, west along Leonard, southwest AB along Highway 199, southwest C is Allen Creek, and then southeast is the Cloverlawn Overland area. So there is these 3 documents the city's already adopted, which basically say, yeah, let's do this. These are, the council adopted strategic plans. Those are 2021 and 2022. The language is just a little bit different in these documents, but it's essentially the same theme. And that's, we should, as a city, proceed to rezone property as an incentive, as an opportunity to help streamline the development process. So the strategic plans, the Housing Advisory Committee work plan, and the housing production strategy, which is pending adoption, all refer to this topic. This is the state regulation that is really kind of most pertinent. There's a number of others that apply if you're rezoning property, but at the scale that we're talking about, this is probably the most significant one just because of the cost associated with it. It's under Oregon Administrative Rule 660.1260, and this is also called the Transportation Planning Rule. The DLCD actually is the state agency that took the lead on it. ODOT was very involved, but it's really more of a land use. Even though it's called the Transportation Rule, it's really more of a land use issue than it is the transportation. And it does require that if you're going to amend your zoning, you have to be consistent with the standards that are in the transportation area and that transportation plan and the facilities for that particular area. It requires us, we have to make a finding that says, yeah, at the end of the 20-year planning period, you're not going to add any more congestion, any more if you're creating a need for a new street widening or a new street, signal, anything like that, that has to be identified up front before you go through and completely rezone the property. And of course, that applies whether we do it or whether a developer does it. It just so happens that you're rarely going to see a developer, come through and do the size of these rezones that we're talking about. So they often fall underneath that TPR rule. These were just some of the factors that whenever we're rezoning that are really important to consider. Most of these are in our development code that we have to look at. This is just a reminder. I don't need to go into a lot of detail on these, but essentially if you're going to rezone, you have to be consistent with the comp plan. You have to make sure physical suitability is there. You look at compatibility issues, apply the lower density zones. Generally, this is our choice, but we, in a best practice, is generally go with your lower density zones in your more challenging areas such as higher topography. Now, this in some ways becomes a moot point under HB 2001, which wasn't adopted when we first started this process, because now you can apply the lower density zones and you can do the fourplexes and the triplexes in them anyway. But generally speaking, these are kind of good practices to follow when thinking about rezoning. The next 2 slides, this first one are kind of what are the benefits to supporting the rezoning process, and then maybe some of the arguments to not proceed. It does increase the supply of land that's owned and that's ready. So that that does have a time factor for developers. It does have a cost factor. It shortens the entitlement period. Typically, you're saving 3.5 to 4 months of time, so that's important. Reduces the planning fees. If the city does it, they don't have to come through and pay the planning fee, which this year the zone map amendment fee is about $2,200. And then it does decrease and actually may eliminate the potential and costs associated with the traffic impact analysis. I say may eliminate because you still have at the time of development the chance for a traffic impact analysis to still be required, even though we would be doing one. Our TIAs are done for the whole for that whole sub area, so we're just assuming kind of on the high end of the development, but depending on whether it's multifamily or depending on where exactly their access points are, there may need to still be some TIA, but mostly that should be addressed. These are a couple of the barriers that may lead the council to not support city-initiated rezones. There's cost and loss of future revenue to consider. For example, the Allen Creek TIA that we're doing is cost us about $56,000. Our consultant DEA did say that would probably come down because they've created the model now. And they were thinking more in the 40,000 range is probably what it would be for some of these other areas. So again, they've learned some lessons. They've integrated that into their transportation model and think that price would probably come down. There's also the issue of unless an outside consultant is hired, just the staff time to manage these processes. The second one there is this decoupling development. So, one of the advantages for us and as a municipality when developer-initiated rezones is they will bring in their concept. And so you'll have the opportunity to sort of look at what is it that they are intending to develop and be able to sort of align that at the same time as you're looking at the rezone. So if we rezone it ahead of time, obviously we're not requiring any kind of concept plans on those lots. And the last one there, zoning without annexation. Rezoning without annexation, it kind of removes that incentive in the future for an owner or developer to have, at the time that it initiated annexation. Some of these they wouldn't be eligible because you have to be contiguous to the city limits to annex. But the presumption at this point is that if the city proceeds with it, we're going to proceed on just a rezone and not an annexation, because up to this point, we've just talked about rezoning property. That is permitted under the agreement, the IGA that we have with Josephine County. It allows us to do that. We would just kind of continue that same practice. But we have in the last year or two tried to move more towards doing the annexations at the time of development so that we can prevent the service and annexation agreement. So the next few slides are just kind of showing what these potential rezone areas are, drilling in a little bit deeper. So this is the rezone area North A. There's actually no residential designations in this area. This is along Highland, going kind of from where Vine turns into Highland, kind of heading up there. That's all got BP and industrial, and we really didn't look into that area for this process. There's another part of the north, and that's these 2 5-acre parcels or thereabouts that are on Vertical Drive. This is pretty steep. You can see there's no existing development, and on these aerial maps, if you want to look on your sheets, you might see it better. The orange is the stormwater, the blue is the water, and then green is sewer. So that shows you where the infrastructure is on all these parcels. So you can kind of get a better sense for the feasibility for development by looking at those. In this case, all 3 municipal utilities are there along the frontage. So moving to the west, the potential rezone area west, again, the red bold line is the one that designates the area that could be rezoned. So in this case, there's kind of 3 separate areas. They're all north of Leonard, on the north side of Leonard, on the south side of the Rogue River, and this is on the far end. I'll just start from the far west and kind of move over. So this is what is currently being processed as Buckmaster subdivision. There's actually 3 parcels that are contiguous here. Buckmaster is coming in with the 2 that are on the far west. They're doing their civil engineering on it right now. They've already got their 50+ lots approved. They're extending water along Leonard that would go along the full frontage. The sewer, which isn't showing up on here, actually is part of the old Redwood District sewer, and that kind of comes up along through the eastern portion here that they will be ending up tapping into. So staying on that area north of Leonard, this is the largest portion of this area, and again, if you're on Willow and you're heading up towards Schroeder Park, which is on the north end of this, about 3/4 of the way up is where our urban growth boundary goes to. So there's property on both the east and west sides of Willow, or I think it might be Schroeder Lane there. And you can see there's a lot of rural development, very parcelized, lots of septic and wells out there. There are a couple of pretty decent sized parcels that are certainly developable. Again, looking on Leonard, you have the water in Leonard going to the east only to the city limits line, so it's just a few hundred feet past the intersection of Willow and Leonard. Otherwise, there's no water going to the east there, and Jason, correct me if I say anything that is wrong with utilities. Yeah. Again, there's a lot that I wanted to start with. What is it that we need to think about with rezoning, and that's why I started with we need to think about what's the infrastructure ability to serve the land, because if there's not a reasonable ability to serve the property with services, then that probably should bump it down, because that is a required finding that we have to make. Now there is, anytime you throw money in it, you can make anything happen, right? Especially if you're looking at large development potential, and it may be worth extending the line 1,000 feet, and we've certainly seen that happen. But it's an important factor. Again, I think in this area, sewers, there's an 18-inch sewer main that runs up here on the north end, and the water doesn't go north of Leonard, but it does extend along the west side and then about 200 feet to the east. Moving on, potential rezone area southwest AB. Again, these are the letters, the labels that were used in 2020 when we first started doing this. So I apologize, we should probably think about relabeling these. But again, most of this property that you see on this slide is already in the city limits and is zoned with city zoning. We'll zero in here on the portion that's on the south side of Highway 199, both on the east and west sides of Dowell. But you can see, looking at here, anything that's blue or red or brown, blue or red or light blue is for employment. So that wouldn't be used for residential growth, new development. The yellow and then the brown, those are the colors that have some kind of residential designation and potential. So there's a mix in here. So if you wanted to proceed with this area, we certainly could break this up and only focus on the residential, or we could focus on the east side of Dowell or the west side of Dowell. there's different ways to approach this. This is on the east of Dow. Again, Dow's here on the left part of this screen, Highway 199 across the top, and then here's the co-op building. So you can see there is an 8-inch water main that continues in front of the co-op, or I should say behind it, but along Schutzwald. But it does stop kind of where their property ends there. So that's where the water is. There's sewer stops in Dow. They're just on the adjacent to the co-op. So, but this is a lot of property. Again, much of which has some kind of commercial or industrial designation on it today. And then moving to the southeast, this is, again, all designated for residential in the comprehensive plan. Right now, you're somewhat familiar with it because there's 5 acres on Glencrest Way and Clover Lawn that is that Veterans Project that you approved the grant for. Other than that, there has been some discussions about other development further north on Clover Lawn, but we haven't seen a lot of inquiries at the planning department about this area. These are 5-acre lots. They're off of Glencrest Way that are pretty hilly, very forested. You can see lots of green space, though. Again, this piece here in the bottom right is the parcel that would be split for that Veterans Project. There is sewer, an 8-inch sewer main that is in the east-west portion of Clover Lawn. But water currently stops several hundred feet up here. That would be, the grant would kind of help to extend that down a little bit further. And then again, staying in the southeast, this is everything. The red line here is the current city limits. So this is, there are really no city services currently today for this portion of the southeast. That would, there's sewer kind of up here in the, just north of it that's in the city limits. But there's lots of other issues related to stormwater and getting water down there that we would have to, probably investigate a little bit further if this is one of the areas that council wants to pursue. And then here's the last section of the southeast that has a little bit more parcelization in the county, but there's a couple of larger parcels still that have a lot of development potential. So wrapping up, a couple of considerations for you. Assuming the goal is to increase the number of development-ready acres that are zoned for residential development, the north and the southwest Redwood Highway areas would probably be lower priorities. When we say north, mostly talking about the hill, the highland area. Since they consist of that non-residential, there is the highest opportunity is probably in that west, southwest, southeast. There hasn't been to date any property owner outreach on this project to assess the readiness for development, their willingness to pursue it. We're really just going off of pre-applications that have been filed at the city to kind of use as an indicator about the level of interest in each of these areas. And the Redwood area would probably rise to the top there in terms of the historical interest that's been coming to the city. So there's a few potential next steps for you to consider. You can do some additional research and or developer solicitation on some of these areas. We could get some more detailed cost estimates. I put this in here before I actually heard from DEA that they're pretty comfortable with that 40,000, but we could, we would need to drill down a little bit more on one of these. So you could give direction to prepare the next city-initiated rezone for a specific area. We would this is a key one, obviously. We need to identify the funding source for to pay for the TIA. We could suspend the decision until after ODOT review of the Allen Creek one. I threw that one in there just because we haven't had any feedback from ODOT yet on the TIA that DEA is approving. That it's done, it's in their court, but they're still reviewing it. So we anticipate, fairly soon, I would say a month and a half or so. And there may be some lessons learned by hearing exactly what ODOT had to say about the Allen Creek one that we could apply to some other ones. But again, I wouldn't say that that's essential or critical. We could still proceed with some research if you want to look into these other areas. We already know what's generally going to be required. Cost implication does vary a lot depending on the alternative that you choose, and it's at your discretion.
Thanks, Brad. Council, do you have questions?
I gave you a warning. It was going to be too much information.
All right, yeah, I know, I'm trying to decide if they're thinking and formulating questions, or do we just move on to discussion? Go ahead, Joel.
Thank you, Brad, for your presentation. So you identified the highest opportunity to add new residentially zoned land is in the west, southwest, and southeast areas. Can you rank those three between those three? Which one has the greatest potential and which one the least?
There's going to be some pros and cons to both. Maybe from an infrastructure standpoint, while I'm talking, Jason can be kind of thinking about it because, we're still going to be, it's not like the city's going to go out there and build the infrastructure. We're just rezoning it.
Sure.
The goal is, really just adding acres that are zoned for residential in the city, ready to go. And you're looking at it strictly from the acres standpoint. It's probably a pretty tight tie between the southeast and that Leonard. I mean, we are with the development of the Buckmaster subdivision. You've got the school right there on Leonard, but there's some challenges with the street infrastructure there. There's a lot of right-of-way that would need to be acquired along that Leonard and Willow Lane stretch, and some of those houses are really close. And so, our standards mean road widening for the city street section. So, that's a big consideration. There's a little bit more latitude in the southeast there. I know that I'm just rambling because I don't have a specific answer for you, but I think between those two, it's pretty close.
Okay, so in the southeast then, in terms of access to city services, sewer line, water line, stormwater, how does that look? Again?
Expensive.
What's that? It looks what?
It looks expensive.
Expensive, okay.
This is why, we'll see. It's certainly going to help. I mean, we're talking about, was it around 600 feet of water main extension?
If not more, for that grant that they just awarded?
For the grant that was just awarded, yeah. So that will help. I mean, on that section, but, a lot of the southeast, correct me if I'm wrong, but that line isn't going to serve most of the southeast area.
It will not.
Yeah.
So the last question, and I'll be quiet. So it seems to me like to make an informed decision on which areas to look at, if any, is to look at the amount of acres that would be rezoned in terms of housing units and potential housing units, and then costs of utilities. And if we have those ranked, and it seems like we can make a really informed decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Dwayne? No? Okay. Other questions? Did you want to jump in there, Jason? No? Okay, Valerie, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my question comes back to, okay, so you have the lands, we have a lot. You also have to know whether the people really want to develop them. I mean, isn't that part of it? Because, obviously, we're not going to be doing the development of it. We're just basically kind of doing the zoning part of it. So I did see it here, outreach to developers. I mean, wouldn't that also kind of play into whether, where we might go next is where we feel that developers are kind of looking for the infrastructure? Is there a way to get outreach of some sort?
Well, we have in the planning division a list, of emails for folks that have done development in the last 5 years or so. So we can use that. That is why I threw that in there, because up to this point we were, kind of waiting for this workshop to see where your general direction went. So we could send out something to see if there's any, sense on that.
Yeah, well, I know with Allen Creek, we knew there was a number of developers that are out there that are kind of chomping in the bit, waiting for it to happen. So I was just curious if we knew of any other builders who had kind of chunks of land that they were wanting to develop. So I think that might be worth pursuing.
Sure.
Other questions?
Thank you.
All right, discussion. DJ.
Okay, where do I begin? So I'm going to start with Allen Creek. That is just, I've been sitting here for years talking about this, and I have nothing tangible, I have nothing appreciable. All I'm being made aware of are the hurdles and the challenges of this novel, innovative idea, and it's just taking too long. We don't know when ODOT's going to process. When was the last time you called him? For a good example, this is taking way too long. Talking about step 2, it's kind of silly, but we have to talk about it. We have to identify these next areas, and it seems obvious to me that highest and best use residential is what council's after, right? This is something council's decided to do a long time ago and is waiting in hot anticipation of this happening. So the best way for me to say this is I just want you to do it, right? I want you to grab this and just do it, okay? I need to see that there is vigor in this process, okay? And to elaborate, I actually mean that. I need effort, energy, and enthusiasm for these kind of things regarding housing and rezoning, and whatever we can possibly do, we need to pursue those with vigor. I need you to just handle this, okay? I need updates, I need innovation, squeaky wheel, whatever it needs. You need to lead us in this charge. Like I said, this is novel, and this is innovative, and it's providing challenges, but the challenges aren't balancing the delay, okay? I understand this on a pretty good level, right? And so, yeah, I can acknowledge the challenges, but the takeaway is identify the areas and pursue it with vigor. I'm not thinking about the development. I'm not thinking about sewer and water and, oh gee golly, the land needs to be developed. But what we can do is we can identify and we can rezone. And we can solve one little portion of the big problem in the room, and that is available, buildable lands inventory. And we need that from you to grab this and do it.
Dwayne?
I wish we would have had some builders here today to voice their opinion on areas they were already looking at. It'd been kind of nice to have some builders speak up about this or even write to us on this. That would be my first comment. And my second is, what does it hurt to bring as much as possible into this rezoning and just let it lay there? Just rezone it all and let it lay there, and let the people that do this do what they do. That's my other comment.
Anybody else? Val?
Well, I think we all would like to have this happen fast. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, when I came on, we were told we were going to have this 500 acres and we could just rezone it. Bingo, here we are. But that's when you run into state regulations and you run into the transportation that says, okay, well, you can't do it because you have to have a TIA. So we can say run off and get a TIA, but have we decided where that $53,000 is going to come from? Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take $53,000 to say, okay, we're going to take this $53,000 here, and this is where we want them to go next. How long has it been for the Allen Creek It's been a while since we actually asked for it. It's been a year? How long is-
Asked for what?
Asked for the TIA for Allen Creek. How long has it been since we gave them and asked them to do that? You said they just about have it. They're going through the final parts of it. But I was just asking you when we put in for it.
I'd have to look, but it has been probably a year.
Yeah, and we have no control over that because we can't do a TIA. So our staff can't do the TIA. It has to be done by somebody. So, we can say go, 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 but the reality of it is it's up to us right now to make that decision. Okay, what area do you want to do? Where's the $53,000 coming from? And they can make it happen. That's how it works.
Joel?
Well, I'm not the most knowledgeable person on this issue, so I'll stick my thumb in my mouth, I guess. It seems to me like we need a plan, and is it a good plan? And so we need to prioritize the areas, and it seems to me like the southeast area and Allen Creek are good areas. We plan on doing all of it over time. We're not going to, depending on the costs, we can't do it all next year, but that we would identify those priority areas, whichever those are, and identify the costs associated with the TIA and move on with it. It seems pretty simple to me, but I tend to look at the world in simple terms.
Dwayne?
I obviously think that everybody knows we're not going to start building next week on this, but we need to start now with the plan and start moving forward. So when they are ready, we're not sitting here doing the same thing we're doing today and going, well, we're going to pick out what properties or whatever land areas. Let's pick something out or whatever, do what we can. I could think of some money in some other areas that are money that we're selling, getting ready to sell property. Maybe we can get some there from there. There's places we can get money, but I think we need to start identifying these areas and moving forward and making a plan.
Vanessa?
Based on our housing production strategy that's not yet adopted, it looks like the best bang for our buck would be southwestern Grants Pass. It looks like there's about 61 acres of land versus southeastern is about 40 parcels, and then the other southwestern location is about 40 parcels. So it looks like the most amount to be rezoned and annexed is that southwestern Grants Pass, south of West Harbeck. But that's just reading the housing production strategy, so I'd like to hear from the Housing Advisory Committee on that as well, see what they think.
All right, DJ, were your comments specific to Allen Creek or rezoning in general? Did you have any direction on a quadrant or all things a go?
Yeah, highest and best use. Based on what I know about this, I don't think pigeonholing would be, into one area, but highest opportunity, as staff recommended, west, southwest, southeast. Let's put them all on there. Do some work, look into it, find out, hey, actually southwest didn't really make as much sense, and we think we can be more productive on southeast. Cool, right ahead, go do it. So let's I'd keep it broad, but we can't forget that Allen Creek is still stuck, right? I'm not really in favor of waiting until ODOT and what they have to say about the TIA. We can gather that information. There's a lot of work that can be done in the meantime to kind of overlap these zoning strategies.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's a strong interest in moving forward, particularly with the southeast and southwest, and doing some additional research and making a plan. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds fine. We could bring back, if council wants, working on the southwest and the southeast areas. Is that what I mentioned there, those two areas? And bring forward to council as a resolution to move forward with that. And then at that time, council would need to identify a revenue source for the contract, and we'll have a better idea of what the cost would be for both of those sections.
Sounds good. Any questions, comments?
I might, if I could, Mayor, just add this, Brad. One thing I didn't point out, there is in that general commercial area on Highway 199, is that probably the highest potential for multifamily, because you can do multifamily in the general commercial zone, which has a lot of that frontage there on Redwood Highway. So I failed to mention that, but when we come back, we'll look at, what kind of potential there is there for some of those larger parcels that have that Highway 199 frontage near Dow. So we'll add that in there.
Okay, sounds good. That falls right into Southwest anyway, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, misplaced my agenda here. I think, are we on the proclamation? Just the proclamation process, there we go.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I am going to tee up this conversation and then allow Council to have a discussion on direction with regards to your proclamation process. So we established a process for declaring proclamations at a Council business meeting March 18th of 2020 through a resolution that was adopted by Council. There are some brief guidelines and content I just wanted to highlight to help with your discussion today. I'll go through those just briefly. The guidelines are: 1, proclamations must be submitted at least 30 days in advance of the issue date. They're not automatically renewed each year. So if someone wanted to proclaim something each year, they would have to make that request 30 days in advance of the time they'd like to have it proclaimed. The mayor does reserve the right to approve or decline requests. Proclamation requests must come from a City of Grants Pass resident and/or organization. There was a time when we were getting proclamation requests from national organizations and groups that had no affiliation with the Grants Pass area, and so that was one of the reasons why that was put into place. With regards to content, proclamations should reflect inclusiveness, not exclusiveness, and recognize that the strength of our democracy is in our diversity. It must not take sides in a matter of political, ideological, or religious controversy or individual convictions. Proclamations must have citywide significance and demonstrate relevancy to Grants Pass. Those 2 slides that I just read encompasses the spirit of what you have adopted by resolution for your proclamation process. So with that, that basically concludes my presentation, is teeing that up for council discussion, and your alternatives are to continue with the current process or amend the process based on council discussion. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Are there any questions for Aaron? No questions? Okay, discussion. Dwayne?
I guess I'll start since I brought this up. I reviewed this and I was told, I didn't know the process, but I went and got the letter mailed to me, and I had 5 questions I came up to in any subject that comes up for a proclamation. My things were, what is the citywide significance of this proclamation? Why is it significant that we do it? What or who does a particular proclamation demonstrate relevancy to Grants Pass? I'm just kind of reviewing some of the stuff on here. The relevancy. Does it take sides on an individual conviction? Really important to me. And what side does an ideological issue take sides on? And how does this proclamation benefit the city of Grants Pass? So when I was looking at proclamations, I'm assuming the council at that time was looking at that we're going to not take sides, not do anything that's going to divide the city or someone's political or religious beliefs when it comes to proclamations, or even if so I look at this by approving any proclamation. What does it, or just doesn't do a proclamation? Does it keep the city on the issues, divide the city residents? Does it divide people when it comes to issues that have no business being part of a government? We're the government here. Should we be taking sides on anything? Should we be promoting things that does not back 100% of the residents in Grants Pass? If the answer is no, then the request should never even be brought up, in my thinking. If it does not represent 100% of everybody, then you are taking sides or dividing our city. And I would say if you were approving, Mayor, the proclamation, if you didn't think all 8 councilors would vote for approving this, then probably a proclamation shouldn't move forward. Because I could think of many proclamations that I want, and most people might not agree with me. I like to have Right to Life Month, or maybe Two Genders Month, or, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, but I'm not going to bring those up because I don't know the effect that brings for everybody here. Maybe they're Muslim, maybe there's something else. So why are we taking sides when it comes to these proclamations, when I think the spirit is being used for people's own agenda?
Rob?
So before we go any further, I'd like to know, is there a majority of the council that feels that the proclamation process has been abused or is broken in some way? Is there something that we need to fix? Is there a majority of the council that thinks that that it hasn't been working well, that we need to fix something? Because if there isn't, we should be done with the discussion. I mean, who thinks that this proclamation process is broken, that we need to fix it?
Apparently Rick also has his hand up. Go ahead, Rick.
No, this is discussion, I believe. I feel there's language already in the proclamation process that's appropriate. Maybe I like guns, but would I want to have a proclamation, a gun month? I don't think that's appropriate. So I think it would be, to me, if a subject is to be brought forth in a proclamation, it would be my preference that a poll be taken of the 8 councilors to see whether they are fully supportive of that, and then to go forward from there with the process already there. Thank you.
Any further discussion? DJ?
Sure. But, the answer to your question, Rob, for me anyway, isn't that cut and dry. Is there an issue that would require further resolution of council to try to fine tune? I'm questioning that. However, I do see validity in bringing to light issues that some councilors might have with the resolution process. And the first thing I thought when you asked, is there anything currently wrong with the resolution process, was, can I remember the proclamation of October 2021? No, I cannot. Do I remember any of them in the recent history being so problematic that I do remember? No, I do not, right? But some of our colleagues clearly have some issues, and I think a foundation by which they are standing on is maybe some contention with some of the line items on those proclamations, and being sure that if council is being said to support something that is proclamation driven, that support has been garnered, right? And I think that's really at the core of the issue.
Is there further discussion? Rob?
So I guess part of what was on the current proclamation process, what was the wording about could you bring that up again?
Sure.
I'm having trouble seeing, where was the word democracy? The word democracy is in there, right? Yeah, I don't have my glasses on right now.
There you go.
Okay. I'm sorry, what line? Okay, second line, right? Okay, recognize the strength of our democracy is our diversity. Now, I guess some people might not agree with that, but I would like to make the point that I think it's imperative that we are cognizant of the difference between a democracy, which is not our form of government. Democracies basically allow the majority to trample the rights of the minority. A constitutional republic, on the other hand, respects and will allow representation for the minority. So basically what we've got, without being a constitutional republic, I mean, without the protections for the minority, things like the 15th Amendment probably never would have been passed. I mean, black men wouldn't have got the right to vote. The 2015 Supreme Court ruling allowing gay marriage in every state would probably never have been passed. But the fact is, the rights of a minority are protected in the United States. So that's actually the form of government that we have. And I think when we have a proclamation that essentially just recognizes a minority, to me, that is what I would focus on, rather than whatever that minority specific views are. The fact that we as counselors and we as the governing body should be representing and respecting the rights of the minority and human rights for everyone. This goes, as soon as when the Supreme Court rules on something, like for instance, gay marriage, it takes all politics out of it. It's no longer a political issue. That's the law of the land. And it's basically, I believe on that particular issue, they basically decided it's a human rights issue, and it takes the politics out of it. So in that particular issue, I don't think that politics are involved when we do a proclamation. We're respecting the rights of a particular minority group. We realize that they deserve respect now and in the future. And I think that makes it really simple. And, I suppose, there's a way of getting around this. I mean, the mayor can just say, I, the mayor of Grants Pass, proclaim such and such to happen, and leaves the council out of it. That would be one way to get around it. The mayor can continue to do proclamations, and the council doesn't have to put their name to it. But I don't know if that's where we want to go, but I just don't see how, when Dwayne talks about 100% of the people have to be represented in all these proclamations, frankly, I think that's absurd. 100% of the people are not going to be represented in anything we do, ever, ever. We're not going to get 90% on almost anything. So protecting the rights, or respecting, I shouldn't say protecting, but respecting the rights of minority, I think is actually where we should be focusing, rather than looking for 100% buy-in from every political party and every religion and every possible subgroup that could be out there. So I personally think that we don't have that much of a problem that we can actually address, because we're not going to get to Dwayne's 100% agreement on anything. I don't think that that should preclude us from making proclamations on Native American Month or Small Business Month or whatever month it may be coming up, just because 100% of the people don't think that Native Americans are appropriate to respect, or they don't think that small businesses should be respected. We're not going to get there. But nonetheless, I don't think that we need to do anything with this process.
Dwayne, then Joel.
I think you decise my words a little, or change my words a little bit, but I mean, I did say 100%, but it also says things are political, and I think that this place is the lowest part of government, and why are we taking or recognizing anything to do with political stuff that's divisive or religious or individual convictions? Why are we doing that up here? That's not our place. We're not put on city councilors to be, everybody says, well, this is a nonpartisan. Well, some of these things that are being brought up are partisan issues. If we're going to be nonpartisan, then we should not be having proclamations that are partisan. So if people ran to be nonpartisan, then they should stay nonpartisan and not pick issues that are partisan. That's how I look at these things. And some of these proclamations that are coming up are very partisan, are divisive to people, and go against people's religious base. And I don't want my name associated with things that I don't believe in, that are against my faith, and I have a right. Just like when someone took the prayer away in this meeting here, when they came office, to me, I was upset about that, the prayer being taken away. It's been important to me. we say the Pledge of Allegiance and it says God. No one's saying they have a problem with that yet, but I'm sure that's going to come up too. I just don't feel that we should be taking proclamations that are very divisive or against someone's religious belief and saying, oh yeah, I'm part of that. I don't sign my name to those things and say I'm a part of it, and I don't want to be a part of it.
Just as a point of clarification here, the council doesn't sign off on the proclamations. I've never had you do that. I don't know if this whole issue is coming up because one of them I don't know if it's said on behalf of the city council. Is there a particular issue with that? Because they are submitted as drafts by the public person who requests them, and it's possible that that didn't get changed, but as a matter of, that would just an oversight if that happened. So, Joel.
So one of the things I think about, I just think, it's fun to think, like my daughter said. It's the United States of America. So there's diversity and unity. One without the other is really dangerous. You can have unity without diversity like Nazi Germany, or you can have diversity without unity and tear the country apart. So we need both unity and diversity, and that's why they call us the United States of America, and that's why we fought the Civil War at a great expense. The other thing is the government. So there's different worldviews, especially in our culture, about how the world's supposed to operate, and that's not a new thing. Over in England, there was different worldviews about how the world was supposed to operate, and the Pilgrims didn't fit in with that. And so they left, and England said, good riddance, and they came over to America. When a government starts pushing a particular worldview that other citizens may not accept, the red warning or yellow warning light at least comes up in my mind, regardless of the issue. And is it possible that we can do that and push our worldview upon others? Christians do it, Muslims do it. I mean, almost every religion does that. The government of England did it with the Pilgrims. Atheists do it. And so we got to be really careful, I think, in our unitedness, along with our diversity, that we don't push a worldview. And how that plays to any particular proclamation, that it depends on the individual you talk to and talk with. So I'm a little bit perplexed, and that's what I've been thinking about. I'm not giving you any answers.
All right, further discussion? Rick.
I realize in the proclamation there's a certain process there and so forth, and at this time it's not required that the council voice or express their approval of a proclamation, but I think in the interest of harmony, that would be a worthy consideration. Thank you.
Valerie?
I'm going to disagree with that because I think that, the mayor does not vote on things. The mayor's role is to run the meetings because that's what it is. And it's the charter, she's in charge of the proclamations. I think that by making an issue of this, I think we are doing more damage. You don't have to agree with everything, and you have a right, to say or whatever. You don't. But I do go back to a couple words I've heard from Rob and Joel both, which is respect and diversity, and that is what our nation is built upon. So I think I'm happy with the way that it is. I am willing, if I felt really strongly, I would come against it, but I don't. I think that, once again, diversity, we're all different. I know this issue came about because of the one coming up in June. I'm perfectly comfortable with that, and I'm perfectly comfortable with the mayor taking it on and know that that is one of her jobs that's written in the charter.
Rob, then Rick.
I completely agree with Valerie's words. And I just want to point out again, I mean, we could have a proclamation that maybe Dwayne would think is wonderful about Future Farmers of America Month. And then we could have Hindus in the audience that are aghast that we would ever consider raising cows for meat, right? I mean, totally legit, Dwayne, right? We could have a proclamation, and we've had them for Small Business Month. There may not be many, but there could be communists who live in Grants Pass who would be absolutely horrified that we are going out of our way as a council to support capitalism. So this discussion is, to me, just can't really possibly go anywhere, because we, again, going back to your words about the 100%, there's always going to be somebody that it takes a severe, gut-felt, heartfelt objection to things that any one of us might think is very reasonable.
Rick?
I like the word that Valerie used was respect, and I have respect for all people, all different walks. But I had a brother who had a lifestyle that I did not agree with, but I still respected him and loved him as my brother. And when I would go to New York, I would still visit him. Did I endorse his lifestyle? No, I did not. So again, when it involves something to me that is controversial, that I don't agree with, I think it's important that we express ourselves and make that known. Thank you.
Vanessa?
I've remained silent and observed just because, mostly because I think that this is a colossal waste of our time to even have this discussion. The real root of this being brought forward is from a place of intolerance. And I will always advocate for a non-homogeneous society. And so be it. If a minority group is acknowledged through the mayor's right to have a proclamation, I support her in doing so.
All right, any further discussion? I heard two people might have an interest in council having a larger role in the proclamation process, but I think with just two of you, it's a dead issue. All right. In that case, let's move on. Next up is agenda review. And just touch on first that we did receive a motion from the Committee on Public Art. They are recommending that we accept Melissa Giuliari's proposal for a dogs and cats selfie spot in the Beaver Alley, which is located behind 217 Southeast 6th Street. They said, the alley beautification project enhances opportunities to promote character and community spirit by providing public art for all community members and visitors to enjoy. This project beautifies the public alley while reducing the risk of graffiti. We ask that the City Council support COPA's goal in continuing the beautification of the city's alleys and approve Melissa Giuliari's mural proposal, which we do not have a copy of that in front of us today. But if you are interested in taking that up, the reason why we do this during agenda review is that now you've heard the motion, and if you want it to go on a future agenda, speak up. That said, let's go over the agenda, and then we'll talk about upcoming things. Tomorrow night, you have your first budget committee meeting at 6 p.m. Wednesday night, we have a council meeting here where we'll have a proclamation about the thanking volunteers for the UCAN warming shelter, a public hearing regarding an ordinance that would be a text amendment for solar standards. Council action items are a resolution adopting the Parklet program, and staff is going to show us some designs. Council action item approving the Welcome Center design, resolution adopting the housing production strategy, a resolution with the for the final $5,000 of the DAS grant, a resolution that would adopt the Sustainability and Energy Action Plan, motion that would regarding the text amendment to Development Code Article 11 that would repeal the tree deposit, a resolution creating a new job classification as emergency call taker, and a resolution approving the Teamsters contract, and then we need to appoint the UAPC members. We made those interviews today, and appoint someone to COPA as well. And your future budget committee meetings will be on May 23rd and 25th. So those are two meetings in the same week there. So just make note of that, and we will not have any more council meetings for the rest of the month. It looks like we have a holiday towards the end of the month. Dwayne.
I would like to pull the Sustainable Energy Action Plan off of the consent and just be a single item if possible.
Okay. Anybody else have anything regarding these upcoming meetings? DJ?
Sure, I did want to mention something about pulling things off the consent agenda. Like we typically try not to do that on the Mondays prior to the Wednesday, right? Try to be more aware of what's coming because it kind of takes a lot of work and effort and reorganization. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Can we, as an option, maybe star it and vote on it separately, or do you want it as a council action?
Well, here's the difference. So starring, it means that it stays in the consent calendar, but we could have a brief presentation or answer a question about it. Putting it as but then it gets voted on as consent calendar. If it moves to council action item, then it would have the presentation, public comment, and a single vote. So you would vote on it separately from the other items. So I thought that's what you were asking for. Do you want it starred? What?
I would just like it to be a separate item, not all bundled in one thing as a vote. So that's just
So he wants to vote on it separately.
Yeah.
So that's a council action item. Okay. Okay, anything further about May meetings? Yeah, if you want to suggest something new, go ahead, DJ.
We have the 24th memo of 2023, 24th memo that we have on our dais today, and it's about incentivizing infill. Yep.
Infill development?
Yep. And there's 5 proposals on there about what can be done to incentivize infill, and I think this is fantastic. This is innovative. This is right up the alley. We should be prioritizing this discussion about encouraging infill, and I might even have some other recommendations to make at that workshop.
Okay, are you suggesting any one of the particular ideas or all 5?
Oh, all of them should be on the table. I think all of them are good. There's been some thought involved in this memo, and we should follow up.
Okay, is there council interest in having a follow-up on that?
Could that be counted as like bringing the builders and having them give their information about it? I'm just thinking, because I know at one point in time we had talked about May, we needed to have, because I don't know, when we did March, when the last time we did it. So I don't know whether this is the next place that you want to go with that or not. That was just my thought, because obviously it does have to do with home builders and building.
Sure, yeah, I'm sure that the association would be delighted to provide input.
Okay. Vanessa's saying yes to more discussion. Val, you wanted more discussion? Okay. Workshop on that. All right. Any new ideas to get added to a future agenda? Vanessa?
I would like this COPA motion added to a new agenda to accept that mural.
Okay. COPA mural. Is there council interest in that?
Yes.
Yes, 3? Okay. Anything further? All right, we have been saving, obviously June 7th has a lot on it right now. June 5th, just since this is our last workshop for a while, June 5th will be dedicated to public safety funding of the future, because that discussion kind of got sidelined after we started dealing with this year's situation. So after you're done with the budget for this year, we'll pick up again on the long-term public safety funding discussion. And then going through the summer, we've been a little hesitant to really schedule things out very full, because we want to hold some space to continue that discussion if if needed promptly, but I know staff is very eager to get some direction on where you'd like to go with public safety funding, because we do need to get ballot language written up by August, is that right? August, if we're putting anything on the November ballot, and obviously we need, campaign information and whatnot going as soon as possible. So keep that in mind. Next, we have a special meeting today, so we need a motion to adjourn the workshop and move into the special meeting. Valerie.
I move to leave the regular season, adjourn into a special meeting.
Thank you. All in favor? Or seconded by Dwayne, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. We are now in the special meeting where we just have one council action item regarding the contract with JoCo Spay and Neuter. And Augustus, welcome.
Mayor Council, how you doing? Good afternoon. I don't have a PowerPoint, just a very short run through of this agreement. So a little background. I gave direction to staff on at our March 1st meeting to work with Josephine County's, JoCo Spay and Neuter to put together a formalized agreement for trap and release, sheltering and feeding in Baker Park only. So you should have in front of you what's marked as Exhibit A. Just going through it real quick, the services dictates that the JoCo Spay and Neuter will be able to do trap, spay and neuter, return services, provide shelter for community cats, and feed community cats in Baker Park, and that they'll be permitted to oversee and advise for the continued care of these cats. Under shelter materials, it has to be a material that will withstand the elements and doesn't detract from the natural beauty of the park. None of the shelter materials can be placed in a riparian area, floodway, or floodplain. And if they need additional shelter space, it can be granted by the city at the city's sole discretion. Insurance-wise, we've shifted the basically the liability to JoCo Spay and Neuter. They'll be required to get at least $1 million in insurance and name the city as an additional insured, and they will indemnify us against any losses resulting from the performance of this contract. So additionally, JoCo Spay and Neuter will have to provide an annual report to the city council at least once a year. That's going to be, how they do it, it's going to be at your discretion. It can be in writing. You can bring them you can tell them to come to a meeting. And they have to outline the number of community cats trapped, released, and then the number of community cats at Baker Park or any other relevant information you deem necessary. Finally, either party can terminate the agreement for any reason with 30 days prior written notice. And the rest of the provisions, which are independent contractor amendment, the merger clause, governing law and signatures, that is all boilerplate. And with that, I turn it over to you for questions.
Questions, Dwayne?
I don't see any here of what they're going to do about these cardboard boxes in the park. I mean, are we giving them kind of requirements, what they're going to do?
So my understanding is that they're not cardboard boxes. I haven't seen them. But in my discussions with the representatives for JoCo Spay and Neuter, these are shelter materials that are supposed to withstand the elements. That would probably be a better question for the park superintendent who actually has seen these things.
Well, I've seen them, and I've taken pictures of them with whiskey boxes with plastic over them, so I was wondering, are we going to require them to have something that's a little more suitable, that's going to be...
So under shelter materials in the park, under Section 1, it states that all shelter materials used for sheltering and feeding community cats in Baker Park will be of a type of material that is able to withstand adverse weather conditions and does not detract from the natural beauty of the park.
So something that's going to be more blended in with this, with the greenery, I should say. Something's going to be that's not going to be so noticeable.
Well, I mean, it's not supposed to detract from the natural beauty of the park. How specific are you wanting to get is, I guess, the question.
Why, the current one is a cardboard box with white plastic on it, so I don't know how, I mean, what is beauty?
I would say that that would not comply with the current language because that's not weather resistant.
And I would also say that I think that was used after they were torn out. It was my understanding that those were not the original ones that were used. The park has stored away, and when they were gone is when they brought the cardboard boxes in covered with plastic. That was not what was originally being used.
Sorry, Counselor, does that answer your question, or is there something else?
I just think it's kind of vague, but, you know, there's not really a requirement and where they're going to be located at or anything like that.
Yeah, so the footprint where they're going to be able to be located is actually pretty limited based on the next section, which states that the shelter materials can't be placed in the floodway, floodplain, or any riparian area. So it's actually going to kind of push them up towards that building that's already at Baker Park, and it's going to basically set, I think by last count, a 50-foot buffer from the river where they're going to be able, actually, I think that's in the floodway of 50 feet to the river. So it's actually, their footprint isn't going to actually be that big. And I don't anticipate, and neither do they, but again, it's up to council whether you let the footprint grow. I don't think it's intended to grow.
I would just say the current spot of it's like Suji Drive. Well, it's kind of green right now, but it's been spotted. It's been really on the left side of the driveway versus like up towards the building in the bushes or something.
Right. So my understanding is that they're trying to move the shelter. They're trying to move the area where the cats congregate a little bit up every little bit. They're incrementally moving the stuff to move it to their final location so the cats get used to where it's going.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Rick?
Thank you, Augustus. So I'm just trying to confirm, you indicated that Josephine County Spay and Neuter was involved with the final rendition of Exhibit A and that they've actually seen this final version?
That is correct. So over the before I went on leave, I spoke to the representatives, sent them this rough draft. I reconvened with them twice after I came back from leave to see if there was any adjustments that they wanted to make. We made a few adjustments, little things here and there, but this does represent the most recent agreement, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, no more questions. Is there anyone from the public who wanted to speak on this issue? Nope. All right, discussion, council, Valerie.
Well, I'd just like to make a motion. I move to approve the resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with JoCo Spay and Neuter for the provision of trap and neuter release services, shelter, and feeding for community cats in Baker Park.
Seconded by Rick. Thank you. Discussion on the motion? Joel?
Well, I applaud the neutering of the cats. I don't think this activity fits within the objectives and purposes of the park and detracts from the value of the park, including the wildlife, especially the feeding. So I'm going to be voting no. I have several friends who have trapped cats and neutered them themselves at their own expense and keep them and feed them on their property, and that works really well. We also have the Humane Society that serves that function. I'm not sure that the park can serve all functions that aren't met by our government and our limited government and still serve the functions for wildlife and our public. I think we're already seeing that with other issues. So I'm going to be voting no.
Vanessa?
I just want to thank the volunteers who take their time to take care of these animals. Thank you.
Rick?
I used to know Carl Raskin, who was spearheading this project before, and I'm familiar with feral cats. In fact, we own one for a while. That I think this is a worthwhile project because of the spay and neutering. And I think otherwise, if left unattended, it can get further out of hand. So I will be in favor of this today. Thank you.
Getting closer to tonight all the time. DJ?
Okay, just give me a meow-mint here. I don't think that this is entirely congruent with usage of public parks. I just don't want to conflate public lands and feeding feral cats. I definitely don't disagree with the angle that was taken that if we don't approve people feeding and spaying, neutering feral cats in our parks, then we don't care. I wouldn't allow it for dogs, I wouldn't allow it for skunks, I wouldn't allow it for cats, I wouldn't allow it across the board. And I love kitties, I really do, but I'm going to be voting no on this.
Valerie, then Dwayne.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the history. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to limit the population of cats. And if anybody of you know how quickly cats can reproduce and how quickly it can be a disaster to have cats that are not fixed in your neighborhood, that's one of the first things I dealt with as a city councilor. Was an entire neighborhood was up in arms because there was a problem with feral cats and they were dying and being killed, and it was just horrible. And who came to the rescue but the spay and neuter? Because Humane Society does not have time to deal with the cats. They don't. It is the spay and neuter people that deal with it. And what has made this so special is that there were really only probably about 8 cats up there right now. But do you really want to remove those cats who've been living there for the last 8 years and been taken care of? I mean, it was never an issue until it was this issue. And it's been going on, and it's been slowly whittling down, which is exactly what a spay and neuter does. So I totally respect these women who have been out there and taking their time. If you've ever tried to catch a feral cat, it is not an easy adventure. So the fact that they're willing to give their time and their money. I have a friend who has had 4 cats spayed that she's taken out of her pocket in her backyard. So if you really have any clue about what a problem it is, you recognize how special it is that these people have devoted their life to this. So I don't think it's going to be an ongoing forever problem. I do think it's kind of waning down, and especially with a limited space, but I would like to think that these cats certainly deserve to go out peacefully.
Dwayne.
I'd say that I'm going to be voting no on this because I don't feel it is something that our city government should be involved with. It's not that I don't love animals. I got animals. I've raised animals my whole life. And obviously we spay and neuter our animals. And I don't think that the city needs to get involved with setting up some kind of agreement with a special group that spay and neuters cats and feeds them. I mean, if they want to catch your cats and spay and neuter them, I don't think anybody is against that part. I think it's the feeding and setting up homes for them. They're called feral cats for a reason. They're not pets. Pets are different. If they're feral, that means they're wild. And I think if we start with feral cats, it's going to be feral something else next. And we already have a dog problem at the parks. And dogs are attacking people and everything else. And now we're going to have an agreement with the city and the feral cat people. I can't even believe that we're talking about feral cats.
Yeah, I completely agree, Dwayne. I can't believe that we're talking about feral cats. I'm not sure how it got brought in front of the council. I know that in 2009, it was an issue in front of the council. It seemed that there was a private group of a few women that were effectively, I guess, handling the situation. But then somehow our government decided we needed to quantify and get involved and stick our nose in, and there didn't really seem to be a problem. I know the night that we first discussed it, I asked the council, I said, what problem are we trying to solve here? No one answered, so I can't believe it's here, but now that it is, I'll be voting yes.
All right, further discussion, or are we ready to vote? All right, Valerie, you made the motion to approve the resolution that would have the city manager enter the contract. How do you vote?
Yes.
And Dwayne?
No.
Rick?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
DJ?
No.
Joel?
No.
Motion passes 4-3. And Valerie?
I'd like to make a motion to exit out of special session.
We could just adjourn for
Oh,
the
or
day?
adjourn for the day. You don't have to jump him out again? Okay,
Yeah.
I make a motion to
Nope,
adjourn.
we should be good. Seconded by Vanessa. All in favor of adjourning today, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll see you cats on Wednesday night.